Hi, welcome to Black Cat Forge. I hope everybody's having a wonderful day. Thank you for coming in. Today's video is going to be a little different. This is going to be just one of the few videos where I just kind of talk about some things in blacksmithing, some things I feel that need to be shared before we get into actually doing any projects. Um, I've had experiences teaching blacksmithing beginners. So what I want to do is I just want to go over some of the things I always talk to my new students about before we get started, because I'm sure a lot of you have an interest in blacksmithing, want to learn about blacksmithing, but maybe you don't have anyone to ask these questions or there's not a forging group around your area. So that's what I want to talk about first. And the first thing I want to talk about is safety, because people always come and ask me, is blacksmithing safe? And my answer to them that I've developed over time is every activity we do in life has some sort of risk to it. You get in your car, there's a risk. You step into the bathtub, there's a risk. But how do you mitigate that risk depends on your likelihood of getting injured. You know, like driving a car, if you wear the seatbelt, obey the law, don't speed, your odds of getting hurt are way lower than somebody who disregards the rules, doesn't wear a seatbelt, etc. So on. That makes sense, right? Same thing for blacksmithing. There's just a few rules that I always tell all my new students, and a few of them are very simple, very common sense. First of all, when you come to the forge, dress appropriately. I don't care if it's 110 degrees outside. You got to wear long cotton pants, jeans. You need to have a cotton shirt. You need to have leather shoes on. I usually wear hiking boots when I'm working out in the forge. Why? Cotton clothes are less resistant to immediately catch fire if they come into contact with a hot object. Synthetic materials will melt. That includes even your tennis shoes. If you're wearing tennis shoes and you drop hot steel, it will melt. And what does it melt to? It melts to your skin. So not only are you getting a bad burn, now you have material melted into your skin. So it's common sense to wear the right clothing. Another thing you might want to do is if you do get into blacksmithing and you really like it and you want to continue on with it, is invest in a good leather apron. My wife got this for me as a Christmas present a few years back. It will last forever if you take care of it. And the nice thing about this is that it does give you another layer of protection, especially when you get later on into blacksmithing and you're starting to use flat disc cutoff wheels. This is just another layer of protection that you have. Um, Another thing I always tell my students is when you're in a blacksmith shop, assume everything is hot. Even if the piece of steel is black, it can still be over 800 degrees. I've seen people come in and just pick up a piece of steel off of a forge because it looked black and drop it immediately because it's very, very hot. If you do not know if a piece of steel is hot or not, it's very simple. You don't use this part of your hand because this part is always used and it's not, the skin's not as sensitive. Just put the back of your hand very closely and you can feel the heat. If it's hot, don't touch it. Uh, like I said, the old saying is don't trust a snowball in a blacksmith shop because it's probably going to be hot. The other thing I always tell people is be aware of your surroundings when you're forging. If you're in your own home forge, you kind of know the layout, you know where things are. But you also got to remember that when you've been using your tongs or you've been using your vise with hot steel, those are hot. Don't touch them. If you're in a forging group with lots of people around you, be aware of who's behind you to your left and your right and in front of you, because there are people that might be walking around with a piece of hot steel in their tongs. You don't want to turn around unaware that they're there and get poked or get branded. Again, it's just simple common sense of making sure you know where you are and taking care of yourself. If you look out for yourself and you look out for the people around you, your odds of getting hurt are very, very slim. Another thing to consider about blacksmithing is the environment. Uh, if you are working it with a group that does coal, you're going to be working in a very smoky environment. And if you have asthma or issues like that, you may wish to go ahead and start working with propane. We'll talk about the differences between propane and coal forges in another video, but just something to think about. When I have been with the forge group, when I was teaching green coal classes, a lot of times, depending on the weather, that forge would be full of smoke. You're coming home and you're smelling like smoke. And, if that's something that bothers you, you probably need to consider using a propane or another form of heating your steel. Another thing to consider is it gets very hot in the summertime. Here I am in the Mid-South. It can be 110 degrees outside, humidity's 80%, and I'm in a room with a bunch of fires going. You need to learn to know your limits. If you're a person that cannot tolerate heat, you need to always make sure that you're hydrated. You take frequent breaks. When you start feeling overheated, go take a break. It's fine. It's not an endurance competition. Another thing to consider is when it's very cold and you want to work. Like here in my shop, I cannot work with a gas forge with all the doors and windows shut. I've got to have something open. So even though I'm in an enclosed area, I have to have fresh air coming in. So when it's very cold, I am working in a cold environment. If I'm working over with my forge group, we have all the doors open. It's cold. Spring and fall are really about the best times if you're not one for extreme temperatures. But again, it's something your body gets used to. Just something to consider. Another thing, people always ask me, does it cost a lot of money to get into blacksmithing? And my answer to you is no, if you do it correctly. The one thing I always tell my students is, first of all, if you're going to get into blacksmithing, that's great. Welcome to the club. We're glad to have you. But a lot of people get into blacksmithing, and after a few lessons, it's either too hot or it's too hard, or they just realize it's not as fun as what they see on TV, and they leave. And that's fine. Not everybody is cut out to be a baseball player. Not everybody's cut out to be a football player. Not everybody's cut out to be a blacksmith. But you know what? You tried. That's all that matters, is that you tried. But what bothers me, and this is just from me being a very practical person, is I see these new students and they come in and they're just all excited. And in their excitement, they go out and they buy all the most expensive equipment they can buy. I've seen some that even just jump ahead of even before having a lesson, and they have an anvil, they have a forge, and they have a vise, and they have everything set up at their home. And then after about 4 or 5 lessons, and it's in the middle of summer and it's really hot, they don't like it anymore. And now they quit, and they're stuck with all this equipment. So please be very cautious when you buy things. Don't jump ahead. Take the classes, graduate from those classes, then start building your home forge. That's what I did. And you don't have to spend a lot of money. You have to just be practical when you set up your shop. If you're a beginner and you're going to come into class, these are the things you need. Please do not go to the big box hardware stores and spend a lot of money on your equipment. Harbor Freight is your best friend. I still go to Harbor Freight. Why do I go to Harbor Freight versus going to a big box store? One, you're working in an environment where your tools will probably get damaged or broke over time. I would rather break a $15 hammer than break a $30 hammer. Your punches are going to get used up. Your markers, your vice grips are going to get broke over time. I would rather just buy a cheap replacement than having to go buy an expensive replacement. So here are the tools that I feel you need to get started with blacksmithing. 1, you need a ball peen hammer. 2, you need to get a crescent wrench. And if you know how to weld, or if you have a friend that knows how to weld, have them go ahead and put another bar across the top. This will be your twisting wrench. A wooden mallet. Wooden mallets are good when you start working with twists. If your twist gets a bend, you can hit it with a wooden mallet. It will straighten it out and it doesn't flatten your twist. We'll talk about that in later videos. Vice grips. Vice grips are vitally important for holding things together. You can even use them as tongs as a beginner. A little trivia question. These were developed in the 1920s by a blacksmith because he got tired of dropping material out of his tongs. He wanted something that would hold and keep his material while he worked with it. Markers. Sharpies or welding markers. Very important. And if you're going to use Sharpies, I always say use a black one and a silver one depending on the color of the steel you're working on. You're going to need something that contrasts a little bit as you work on it. A half round file is very good for cleaning up the edges. Needle nose pliers, just a regular set of pliers. This is very important, is a nice wire brush for cleaning the scale off. A set of chisels, a 1-inch chisel and a 1/2-inch chisel. And a set of center punches. You will need center punches to mark where you're going to drill or where your measurement mark is. And then the most important thing you're going to need is a nice cross peen hammer. Now, I do feel like a little bit of a hypocrite saying not to buy the most expensive hammers you can. My Harbor Freight hammer I left at my forge group last meeting I was at. I've got to go pick it up. This was actually a gift from my wife. This is a 2-pound cross peen hammer. You really don't want to go more than 2 pounds because a 3-pound hammer or more will wear you out a lot quicker, and it doesn't move the steel any more efficiently than having a 2-pound cross peen hammer. And like I was saying about people going out and buying the most expensive things, this was my first anvil. This is a piece of railroad track. I think I paid a whopping $1 bill for it at a garage sale. That was my first anvil. Then I moved up to an NC Tools anvil, and then I moved up to a Peter Wright anvil. You don't have to buy the most expensive things while you're learning. Learn proper form and technique before you start investing in a lot of expensive equipment. Now, on the safety side of things, there's a few things that you're going to need. One, you're going to need a glove for your non-dominant hand. Why? Because this is the hand that's going to be holding tongs, maybe holding things that are warm. You want something to protect your hand. Now, another thing to always think of, especially if your glove should ever catch fire, your glove should be loose enough that you can shake your hand and it comes off. The temptation is to always stick that burning glove with your hand in it in the quench tank at your forge. That's a no-no because if, like this leather glove, it would compress and shrink on your hand while it's very hot, and then you have a bigger problem than that. So you always want your glove to be just on there enough that if you had to get it off in an emergency, a couple of quick shakes and it falls right off. Another thing that you should think about having is ear protection. I use these over the ear. These are like what you would use for shooting. Why do I use these and not the little roll-ins or the noise-canceling headphones? Well, one, these you can put on, you can take off very easy. The nice little foam roll-ups, you got to remember, you're going to be in a very dirty environment. Somebody's trying to talk to you, you pull them out, you put them back in. The dirt on your hand then goes into your ears. I really don't like that. And noise-canceling headphones, I have been doing some research on that. And I have found that, yes, they're good for like if you're, trying to study or try to work in a noisy environment. But for like protecting your ears in a shop environment, they're not that great. So these are about the best things you can do. And it does get noisy. Even when I'm just in the shop by myself, I might be using a grinder or a cutoff wheel. I might be using my belt sander. Or If you're working on the heel end of the anvil, the ring can be very loud. The decibels are in the range that it can damage your hearing. The other things to think about is eye protection. If you have prescription glasses, and you have high impact lenses, you're probably going to be good. If you want, there are glasses that will fit, safety glasses that will fit over your prescription glasses. It's important to protect your eyes because as you work on the hot steel, you'll notice flakes coming off of it. That's called scale, forged scale. Basically, the steel is rusting in the heat, and scale will go wherever scale wants to go when you hit it with a hammer. I've had scale hit me right here. I've had scale hit me in the arms. I've had scale almost hit me in the eye before. So protect your eyes at all costs. Something you can always think about is buying a full face shield. Probably not the best thing for just forging, but for when you start working with cutting wheels and all, that is a must-have because you don't want things getting in your eyes when they're flying all over the place. Another thing to consider is some sort of respirator to protect your lungs. Those are all nice to haves, and those are really common sense things to use when you're working in your forge. Another important question that people ask me is, well, where do I get steel for blacksmithing? And that's a very good question, and it's something that a lot of people don't think about. If you choose the wrong type of steel, can be very bad for your health. It could be one of the last things that you do in your life if you have the wrong type of steel. And what I'm talking about is when you go use steel, especially as a beginner, I would say go to the store and buy steel. Make sure it has a tag on it, sticker on it that says weldable steel. That means that is a steel that you can use in high heats. It's perfectly fine. You do not, and I'm going to repeat, do not use any steel that is zinc coated or galvanized. Those two steels, when they get under high heat, as in your forge or with your welder, they produce fumes that are toxic to humans. There have been blacksmiths that have passed away, sadly, because they caught what is called metal fever. There's a bunch of old wives' tales floating around on the internet about, oh, just drink milk, just do that. No. Stay away from those steels. Do not use them in your forge. If you find some steel laying around and you pick it up and you do not know what it is, don't use it. Try to find a friend or somebody that knows metals and make sure it's safe to use. Your life is not worth a free piece of metal. Your life is not worth a cheap piece of metal that you found to buy. Buy steel from a known source and steel that is safe for using. That was something I didn't know about till about a year or so getting into blacksmithing. But once I started talking to a lot of the old timers that I hang around with, I realized how bad that steel is. And finally, before we close, the one thing a lot of people ask me is, well, with YouTube and the internet, do I really need to take blacksmithing classes? And my answer to you is yes. Yes, there's a lot of great blacksmithing videos out here on the internet. I've learned a lot of them from like Black Bear Forge, Christ-Centered Iron Works. I've learned a lot of cool projects that I can make. I've learned a lot of things from them. But if you have not had a class and learned the basics, and you've learned the proper technique for using the tools that you have, you're never going to be a good blacksmith. Because you can sit and watch me on YouTube make a project, and you can try your best to imitate me. But I'm not sitting there looking over your shoulder going, that's wrong technique. You need to learn the proper forms and techniques from a teacher. Why is that important? Because if you do not use this hammer correctly, you will wind up with what's called blacksmith elbow. You can also mess up your shoulder. And I know some blacksmiths that have like almost permanent injuries from not learning the proper technique. Learning that proper technique in the beginning is so much easier than trying to unlearn an improper technique that you taught yourself. It's just kind of common sense. Um, and people always say, "Oh, well, where can I find classes?" Well, that's fairly easy. You can Google search. If you live in the Appalachian areas, you can go to the AACB website. They have a complete listing of forge groups all in their area that offer classes. You can also go to the Abana website, look for teachers there. If for some reason you're somewhere that there's not any forge groups local, just look for blacksmiths in your area. I'm sure there are some blacksmiths around somewhere close by, and most blacksmiths love to pass on what they know. And, if you offer to help around the shop or even pay a few bucks for a few classes, they can get you at least started. But it is very important that you try your best to take a few classes to learn the basic techniques. We'll talk about the basic techniques in some later videos. But again, it's a lot easier to learn them with somebody over your shoulder and correcting you from the mistakes you're making rather than watching a video and not having the feedback that you get. All right, so anyway, I hope that I answered a lot of questions you have. I hope you enjoyed this video. I really like teaching, and I've had some awesome teachers over the time, and I feel I would do them a disservice if I didn't continue trying to teach the blacksmithing community. So I'm trying to do that, to pass on what I've been taught. If I didn't answer any questions that you may have, or maybe I didn't go into too much detail about something, please put a comment down there. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have. I love to teach, and we're going to start moving into what I'm going to call Blacksmithing 101, where I'm going to take you through exactly the same thing I would take a brand new student with if they were here in the forge, how to learn. We're going to learn the basics. We're going to learn all the basics, because once you've learned all the basics, you then start tying them together, and that's how you start making awesome things. So please click like, please click subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.